Imagine you've just lost everything. And I don't mean like a temporary setback or a bad day at the office.
Yeah, not just a bump in the road.
Exactly. I mean, your home, your social status, your entire nation just completely erased. You're sitting by this muddy foreign river as a captive.
Yeah, you're entirely displaced.
Grieving, displaced, and essentially trapped in the dreary waiting room of your life. And then, without a single warning, the ceiling of your reality just caves in.
Which is terrifying.
Right, because you don't look up and see a peaceful entity with a harp.
Yeah.
You get hit with this reality-bending storm of fire, unblinking eyes, and these omnidirectional wheels.
It is arguably the ultimate interruption in all of literary history.
It really is. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're exploring the opening chapters of the book of Ezekiel.
And we've pulled together a massive stack of sources for this one. Ancient Near Eastern cultural analyses, linguistic breakdowns.
Centuries of commentary. Because our mission today isn't just to, gawk at the bizarre imagery, even though the visual language here is absolutely wild.
Oh, it's borderline psychedelic.
Yeah, it really is. But we're going to trace the intense flow of this text from that mind-bending initial vision all the way to the agonizing psychological process of an exiled man getting this life-altering mission.
And to really grasp the weight of that mission, we have to start exactly where the sources anchor us, the geographical and emotional context.
Right, because the text is incredibly specific here.
It is. It tells us it's the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity, which is the 30th year overall. Ezekiel, who is a priest, is sitting among the captives by the river Jabar in the land of the Chaldeans.
And we really need to pause and to just feel the weight of that, because for a priest in the ancient world, your entire identity, your daily routine.
Or ancestral purpose.
Yes. All of it is permanently tethered to one physical location, which is the temple in Jerusalem. And that temple is hundreds of miles away, completely out of reach.
He's culturally displaced and, well, effectively unemployed.
Surrounded by a community in deep despair.
And that context of profound human despair is crucial, because it's precisely in this environment of utter hopelessness that the text states, the hand of the Lord was there upon him.
And the heavens were opened. The juxtaposition is just jarring.
It is. You have absolute human limitation violently colliding with this unexpected sensory assault from the divine.
And it really is a sensory assault, because before Ezekiel gets any kind of job description, he has to face the entity giving the orders.
He looks up, and a stormy wind comes out of the north.
But this isn't normal weather. It's a massive cloud with fire flashing continuously and a blinding brightness just radiating all around it.
And the linguistic analyses point out something really fascinating right in the center of that storm. Out of the midst of the fire, the text describes something glowing.
Right, that specific word.
Yeah, the original Hebrew word used here is hashmel. It's a notoriously difficult word to translate.
Modern translations usually go with what? Electrum?
Electrum, yeah, which is an alloy of gold and silver. Or sometimes glowing amber. But the ancient implication is something almost like a nuclear core.
Wow.
An intensely radiant humming center of glowing metal shining from deep inside the flames.
Okay, so you've got this violent storm, flashing fire, and this glowing radioactive hashmal. And then, out of the middle of it, 4 living creatures emerge.
And if you're picturing like a Renaissance painting of chubby babies with feathered wings.
Right, completely erase that from your mind. The anatomy described here is entirely alien.
It completely defies any standard biological categorization.
The text says, they had the overall likeness of a man, but their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like calf's feet, sparkling like burnished brass.
In the faces, that's where it really gets surreal.
Oh, the faces are wild. Each creature doesn't just have one face, it has 4. A human face in the front, a lion on the right, an ox on the left, and an eagle at the back.
Plus, they each have 4 wings, with human hands underneath those wings.
Which is just so bizarre to picture. 2 wings joined together to connect the creatures, and 2 cover their bodies. But here is the detail that completely breaks my brain.
The movement.
Yes, they don't turn when they move. The text says they went everyone straight forward, and their movement was like a flash of lightning.
It's a complete overload of the human visual processing system. But the text is using this bizarre physical description to imply a very specific underlying logic.
Right, based on the historical commentaries.
Exactly. Those 4 distinct faces, the man, the lion, the ox, and the eagle, they aren't random. They represent the highest domains of the natural world in the ancient Near East.
The wild beasts, the domesticated beasts, the birds, and humanity.
Right. It's a visual shorthand for total dominion over the physical realm.
And what about that unimpeded movement, just moving like lightning without ever pivoting?
The sources tie that directly to the concept of ruach, the Hebrew word for spirit or wind.
Ah, okay.
The text notes that they go wherever the ruach goes. They never have to turn or course correct because their movement represents absolute, unimpeded purpose.
The spirit wills a direction, and they're instantaneously moving toward it.
Exactly.
Which is an incredible image, but the text makes it clear that these four-faced creatures are really just the engine, right?
Precisely. They are connected to a much larger, even more terrifying mechanism.
Down on the earth, beside these living creatures, are the wheels. And these aren't like wooden cartwheels.
Oh, not at all.
The text says they gleam with the color of Tarshish, which is a beryl stone, sort of a brilliant sea green. And the structure is described as a wheel within a wheel.
Which is hard to visualize.
I was trying to picture how this would actually function, and the best analogy I can think of is a highly advanced gyroscope. You know, those intercepting rings that maintain perfect balance regardless of the chaos happening around them?
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The gyroscope maintains absolute stability even when the entire geopolitical world
When Jerusalem falling to Babylon.
exactly is spinning completely out of control. And the text explicitly states that the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels.
So when the creatures lifted up, the wheels lifted up.
Yes, the biological and the mechanical are perfectly synchronized.
But then there's a detail on those intersecting rings that is just genuinely dreadful. It says their rings were massive, terribly high, and completely full of eyes all around.
Just looking in every direction.
It is a deeply unsettling, almost paranoid image.
It is, but look at the theological function. Those eyes represent total 360-degree awareness. It is ultimate omniscience.
Wow.
It communicates to the captive Ezekiel that absolutely nothing escapes the notice of this structure. Even in exile, they are entirely seen.
Okay, so we have the flashing fire, the four-faced creatures, and this massive, eye-covered gyroscope of beryl. It's a colossal cosmic chariot.
But the text forces our gaze upward.
Right, because above the creatures, there's an expanse, a firmament shining like terrible ice.
The vast, awe-inspiring, crystal-clear barrier.
And above that terrible ice is a throne, looking like a sapphire, a brilliant blue sapphire stone. And seated on that sapphire throne is a figure.
But pay very close attention to how the text describes this figure. It says, it is a likeness as the appearance of a man.
Okay.
And from the waist up and waist down, it's glowing with that exact same hashmal, that electrum fire, surrounded by a blinding brightness like a rainbow on a rainy day.
Hold on, I want to unpack the language there because this raises a massive question. Ezekiel is looking at the pinnacle of this vision, the ultimate authority.
Right.
But he doesn't just say, I looked up and saw God. Instead, he uses this incredibly layered, almost defensive language.
Yes, he does.
He says, this was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. Why put up so many linguistic shields? Appearance, likeness, glory. It feels like he's terrified to just state what it is.
He is absolutely terrified, and for good reason. What's fascinating here is the profound reverence colliding with an acknowledgement of the limits of human cognition.
Because human language just can't capture it.
Exactly. It cannot capture the ultimate reality of the divine without diminishing it. If he just boldly stated, I saw God, it would reduce the infinite to the finite.
So he builds these linguistic layers.
Right. It's an approximation of an approximation of an approximation. The text is effectively trying to protect the human mind from the absolute crushing trauma of witnessing infinite reality.
It's like a buffer zone. Because facing this overwhelming display of power, Ezekiel doesn't just get to sit back and observe it like a movie.
No, he has to actually interact with it.
And the way he receives his calling isn't just a quiet voice from the sky. It's a brutal physical process of unmaking and remaking.
Yes, the psychological and physical toll is immense. The very first reaction isn't to politely kneel or take notes. It's a complete system override.
The moment he sees this glory, he just falls upon his face.
It is an involuntary physical collapse in the presence of overwhelming authority.
Total prostration. But the text doesn't let him stay there. A voice speaks from the throne and says, Son of man, stand upon thy feet. But Ezekiel is completely emptied out.
He doesn't just dust himself off and stand up.
Right.
He lacks the agency or the physical strength to stand in that presence. The text says, and spirit entered into me when he spoke unto me and set me upon my feet.
That same ruach, that drives the cosmic gyroscope has to physically lift his paralyzed body so he can actually receive his orders.
Exactly. And those orders are incredibly bleak. The voice addresses him as Son of Man, which our linguistic sources note highlights his fragile, mortal humanity in contrast to this divine machine.
And he's commissioned to go to the rebellious house of Israel.
Right. And the parameters of this mission completely redefine success. The voice tells him, whether they listen or whether they forbear meaning, whether they completely ignore you, they will know a prophet has been among them.
It's a radical shift. His worth is no longer tied to his reception.
Got it all.
It's like being drafted into the most difficult public relations job imaginable, where your performance isn't measured by whether you actually persuade anyone, or whether the public likes you, or even if they listen to a single word you say.
Right? Your success is measured solely by the integrity of delivering the message.
And to deliver that message, we reach one of the most fascinating psychological moments in the text. He doesn't just memorize the words, he has to physically internalize them.
A hand extends to him, holding a roll of a book.
A scroll. And the text makes a point to say it is written on both the front and the back, which means it is absolutely full. There is no blank space left.
And the contents of this densely packed scroll. Lamentations, moaning, and woe.
Yeah.
It is a literal document of doom.
And then comes the command. God tells him to open his mouth and eat the scroll.
Right. Eat it.
Wait, hold on. I'm looking at the commentary notes here, and this is where I get genuinely confused. He eats a scroll filled with literal doom, moaning, and woe. But the text says that when he eats it, it tastes as sweet as honey in his mouth.
It does say that.
That makes absolutely zero sense. Is he a masochist? How does a document of pure misery taste sweet?
Well, that is the exact paradox that reveals the psychological depth of this calling. The sweetness represents the purity and clarity of receiving absolute truth directly from the divine.
Oh, I see.
Think about his situation. He is a priest wandering aimlessly in exile, devoid of purpose. Suddenly, having crystal clear communication, having a definitive, undeniable purpose given to you by the creator of the universe that provides a deep existential satisfaction.
The truth itself is pure and sweet.
Exactly. But the text pivots immediately.
Right, because after he eats it, the Spirit lifts him up to physically transport him to the other exiles at Tel Aviv. And he says he went in bitterness, in the heat of my spirit.
Because while the truth is sweet, the application of that truth in a broken world is intensely bitter. He now carries a massive burden.
He has to take this message of woe back to his own people who are already traumatized and suffering in exile.
The internal heat, that bitterness, is the agonizing human reality of the message he now embodies.
And that internal burning leads to his reaction when he finally arrives at Tel Aviv, because he doesn't show up and immediately start preaching on a soapbox.
No, he sits among the captives, utterly appalled and stunned.
He sits there in complete silence for 7 days. He is paralyzed by the weight of what he has internalized.
And, we really shouldn't view Ezekiel as a passive vessel during this process. He isn't a robot simply executing a downloaded program. He wrestles deeply with the horrifying realities of this calling.
And the sources give us a brilliant example of this act of wrestling just a little bit later, right, in chapter 4.
Yes, the sign of the siege.
God commands Ezekiel to act out a highly visible sign to illustrate the coming siege of Jerusalem. He's told to bake his rationed daily bread over human dung as a visceral symbol of the defiled food the people will be forced to eat during the siege.
Which, we have to remember his background here. For a Zadokite priest whose entire life from birth has been strictly governed by complex laws of ritual purity, this is an unthinkable, horrifying violation of his core identity.
Yes, and he doesn't just passively accept it. He passionately pushes back against the divine command.
He does.
He cries out, "Ah, Lord God, behold, my soul hath not been polluted, neither came there abhorred flesh into my mouth." He draws a hard boundary. He is essentially saying, I am willing to do incredibly difficult things for this mission, but I will not intentionally defile my soul.
And remarkably, the text says God relents. He allows Ezekiel to use cow's dung instead of human dung.
That is a fascinating detail.
It's a vital detail that many commentaries highlight because it proves there's a partnership in the calling. The burden is impossibly heavy, but Ezekiel's humanity, his conscience, and his lifelong devotion to purity are still recognized and accommodated by the divine.
So bringing it back to those 7 days of appalled silence at Tel Aviv, after a week of total paralysis, the silence finally breaks, and his actual job title is clearly defined.
The role of the watchman. In the original Hebrew, the word is sopheh.
Sopheh.
At the end of the 7 days, God officially appoints him, Son of man, I have appointed thee a watchman unto the house of Israel.
And our historical sources explain that a sofa in the ancient world was a military lookout. You stood high on the city walls, constantly scanning the horizon for approaching danger.
Right.
If you see an enemy army coming, your one job is to blow the warning horn. If you blow the horn and the citizens ignore it and are killed, you have done your job. Their blood is on their own heads. But if you see the sword coming and you don't blow the horn...
The text is entirely unambiguous here. If God declares a wicked person will die in their iniquity, and Ezekiel fails to warn them, that person will die. But God says, his blood will I require at thy hand.
It's a staggering transfer of responsibility. I was trying to think of how that feels today, and the closest modern equivalent is, well, being a corporate whistleblower.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Imagine you were an engineer who discovers a fatal flaw in a commercial airplane. It isn't your job to redesign the plane, and it isn't your job to make the executives like you. But if you possess that critical knowledge, you have a life or death obligation to blow the whistle, even knowing the corporation will try to ruin your life. If you stay silent, the impending crash is on your hands.
That analogy captures the emotional terror of the role perfectly. The text is arguing that true knowledge is never neutral. It comes with a heavy, sometimes crushing burden of responsibility.
Yeah.
Ezekiel's calling, as the Sofa teaches us, that having integrity in a hostile environment isn't about metrics of persuasion. Sometimes true moral victory is simply having the courage to speak the truth out loud, regardless of the reception.
Yeah.
If you have warned them, the text says, thou hast delivered thy soul.
It completely shifts the pressure away from the outcome. The pressure is solely on your faithfulness to the message.
Yes, the action of speaking the truth becomes the victory itself.
So let's step back and look at the sheer scale of the journey we've mapped out today. We started with a displaced, grieving priest sitting by a muddy river in Babylon. Then the sky rips open to reveal this sensory explosion, a cosmic gyroscope of barrel-intercepting wheels, unblinking eyes, terrifying ice, and a glowing nuclear core of electrum.
The Hashma.
He is physically knocked flat, pulled back to his feet by an unseen spirit, forced to eat a scroll of literal doom that tastes paradoxically sweet but burns his gut, and finally he is burdened with the crushing life-or-death responsibility of the watchman.
It is a profound stage-by-stage depiction of psychological and spiritual transformation, driven by an encounter with the incomprehensible.
But there's one final, intensely provocative detail from our sources that I want to leave you with. Later in the text, in chapters 10 and 11, we see that massive, terrifying chariot again, the glory of the Lord with the complex wheels and the four-faced creatures.
Right, it appears again.
And the text describes it physically lifting up. It leaves the threshold of the temple in Jerusalem. It hovers over the cherubim, moves out the east gate, and stands upon the mountain on the east side of the city.
It intentionally abandons the geographic center of the religion.
Exactly. The divine presence wasn't trapped in a stone building. It wasn't restricted to a single nation's borders. The wheels within wheels could move, and they moved right into exile alongside the captives.
That's incredibly powerful.
Think about what that means for a moment. Even when you are sitting by a foreign river, even when the ceiling of your reality caves in and you feel completely displaced, exiled, and far from where your life should be, the truth and the heavy responsibility that comes with it can still find you anywhere. Where are the wheels moving in your life right now?